Welcome back to Market to Market. Global News Matters is an international market intelligence organization which conducts in-depth market research and analysis on the Latin American, Caribbean, and US regions. Managing Director Melissa Marchand chats with us now about our region's economic outlook and major opportunities for trade and investment. Tell me about the work of Global News Matters.
Okay, well, there's, one of the things that we do are really our sweet spot is we work with the Caribbean. We work in the market intelligence space. And, this is a time where there's a lot of growth in the Latin American and Caribbean markets. And so what we've seen is, these are extremely profitable markets. There's a lot of high volume moving through these markets right now. And, in order to be able to operate in these markets, you have to understand that there is risk involved and as well as opportunity, right? So, what Global News Matters really is we close that information gap in order for companies to really understand what risks are involved in doing business here in the Caribbean as well as Latin America, and, in order to be able to expand and operate successfully in the region.
From your research, have you found that there's an opportunity for investment in Caribbean and Latin America?
This is one of the best places in the world to invest. Here's why. When we look at growth in Latin America, we can see that Latin America and the Caribbean has been growing at a pace of about 4% since 2003, okay? So it's actually one of the four major engines of growth in the world, behind China, India, and the Asian tigers. Beyond that, looking into it, like what's the specific opportunity, we can also look at the market size that we have access to. So we're talking about a market in Latin America and the Caribbean of about 580 million consumers, okay? And we've seen a lot of transition lately coming through this market. So it really becomes an interesting time to look at doing business in this region.
What are some of the changes in the market that you've recognized?
So one of the most important things that we've seen is that there's been a large transition within the population towards the middle class, okay? So when we look back, 1995, the middle class, made up about 21% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, in 2010, that was 41%. So you've seen 20 points of difference, a transition of 20 points within the population that has now been included in the middle class. What that drives is greater consumption, greater domestic demand, and a lot of opportunity to bring new products and new services to the market.
What sorts of markets you think, or products, investment areas are really opening up?
See, that's what's really interesting about this market is because it's expanding at such a robust pace, there's space in almost every sector, okay? One of the things that I like to talk about is when we look at the opportunity in Latin America, one of the places you can actually play is you actually get to play in the space of being the first in market. That's true in technology, that can be true in almost any sector, right? But you can be the first person to bring a technology to a country, to a city, to a community. You can be the first person to bring a new service to a different place of the world. So you can many times get the opportunity to be first in market, and that's one of the really interesting opportunities with working within this region.
What are some of the emerging trends that you've noticed?
Within Latin America
yes.
and the Caribbean, some of the emerging trends, there's been a lot of focus from an investment standpoint as well as a foreign trade standpoint on the area of technology. That's an area that's gotten a lot of attention. It's really exciting right now here in the Caribbean. The region's #1 tier 4 facilities in construction right now in Curacao. So that's interesting to see. Here, very close to Trinidad and Tobago, we're actually going to be right next door to the premier tier 4 facility, the region's first, and we're seeing a lot of investments along those lines, right? This is a sector that's booming throughout the world, and that of course complements into other sectors. So technology is definitely a place where we're seeing a lot of action. Services is another area. Renewable energy. There's considerable investments being made in renewable energy. coming from all different parts of the world, coming from Canada heavily, coming from Europe, as well as the U.S., and from within Latin America as well. Pharmaceutical sector, there's a lot of potential and a lot of growth in several different sectors.
Are there any marked differences in the markets, the Caribbean and Latin America?
You know, it's interesting when you think of them. You can think of them in two ways. You can think of them as separate markets, or you can think of them as one. When we start to think of, you know, how do we position Trinidad and Tobago, we can start to think that we become an access. We become an access here in Trinidad to not just a market of 1.3 million people, and not just a market of 17 million CARICOM consumers. You know, within the Caribbean, there's 43 million people in the Greater Caribbean, the Dutch, French, English, and Spanish Caribbean, and including the other CARICOM countries, Belize, Guyana, and Suriname. And you know, when we look at Latin America, we're talking about 580 million consumers. So you know, again, two markets. When we look at them as one, we see a lot more opportunity. There's a lot in common between, you know, the Caribbean and Latin America, much more in common than perhaps with other areas of the world. So you can see that the region really lends itself to building business relationships and doing business, finding new opportunities and doing business successfully in both regions.
What are some of the key challenges you foresee for the region in the future?
There's several things to look at and to keep an eye on. You know, the fiscal situation throughout the region, not just here in the Caribbean, within Latin America as well, is something that you really have to keep an eye on. And you know, these countries have been growing at a very robust pace. And when we look a little bit at why, we can also see that there has been high levels of public spending. So it's something to keep your eye on and make sure that, you know, you're watching it. It's not the only thing. There's several other things. Inflation is another thing. Commodity prices. Many Latin American and Caribbean, there are several Caribbean countries that are also, you know, their economies are based heavily on commodities. Okay, and so you know, that's another thing to keep an eye on. How are commodity prices, you know, moving, and how are the economies diversifying? What are the governments doing? What policies are being put in place in order to, you know, be able to successfully carry that economy forward and maintain that robust pace of growth?
How would you describe the future outlook of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of investment and the economy?
So here's what I think is really the opportunity for Trinidad, is that Trinidad is literally at the doorstep of 580 million consumers. And you know, when we start looking at, you know, what's the economy going to look like going forward, I think it's going to look very different. You know, the central bank just reported, you know, last week, that the non-energy sector, of course, has grown at a more robust pace than the energy sector. That's interesting, and that's great, and that's where we're going to see, you know, a lot of growth coming and a lot of investment coming here in Trinidad. You know, going beyond energy and looking at other things. You know, that's also where we're going to see the opportunity to enter into the wider Latin American market. Is coming through these other sectors as well.
How would you say Trinidad and Tobago's business sector can address the information and resource gap?
Look, there's you know, one of the most challenging things about doing business in this region is actually getting access to the information you need. That's the space that we operate in, and that's really our sweet spot. You know, it's really understanding what are the indicators that you need to keep your eye on, and who manages them, where can you get the information from. You know, we do a lot of customized reporting where companies will actually call us and ask for specific indicators. Typically, companies don't want to just know what's going on in Trinidad and Tobago. They want to look beyond their borders, and so they want to know, you know, what is happening with the institutions in Barbados, what's happening in Aruba, what's happening in Dominican Republic, and in the non-English speaking countries, and that's an access that we provide as well. So it's knowing your indicators and getting access to those indicators.
How does Global News Matters help in this area?
That's exactly you know, what we do, is helping the companies get the information that they need in order to operate successfully. So when we look at the information gaps that exist, you know, we deal with, just in the Caribbean, we deal with 4 languages, okay? the Dutch, French, English, and Spanish, and we produce everything in one language. So that in itself is a huge advance in getting the information you need. Along with that, we work with the institutions, and we work with over 350 sources throughout the region. So on a week-to-week basis, we're knocking on 350 doors, and so it's a considerable time savings in getting the information you need as well. And I guess the other point there would be that the analysts that we have and the groups that we have working on this. When something comes out that's very important and relevant, when financial statements are released, we actually bring in a financial analyst to take a look at those, that does that specific, that's their niche, that's their sweet spot, that's their specialty. So we bring in those resources that are needed for each thing that we need to analyze, whether it's a new policy coming out, a new law that's coming out, and really follow what's the impact of what's going on in the region.
How does the growth of the Latin American and Caribbean markets compare to those in North America?
The growth in Latin America and the Caribbean is very robust. As a matter of fact, this year the Latin American and Caribbean markets are expected to grow between 3 and 3.5%. Next year it's expected to grow between 3 and 3.9%. When we look at the North American market, what we see is that Latin America and the Caribbean is actually going to outgrow the North American market by about a point to a point and a half. So it's a really interesting time to be playing in this market, and when we look at doing business and the opportunities, we can see that the place to look for opportunities is looking south.
How can business persons get in contact with you?
So there's several ways to contact Global News Matters. Our information is all available on our website. It's www.globalnewsmatters.com. We also have a Facebook website, facebook.com/globalnewsmatters, and LinkedIn. We can be contacted as well. So, the information about our publications, we do have publications that are specific to the Caribbean. We have one publication that's our flagship publication. It's called Market Dynamics Caribbean, and it's a corporate publication. It's actually intended for the entire company to use. So, different from other types of publications in this space, we actually want the company to pay for one subscription and the whole company has access. So it's a little different model. All of the information on our products is available through our website, and I can also give you my personal contact information if anyone would like to follow up with any questions.